very quickly, and I just ask that everyone be respectful and professional and understand that sometimes there may not always be entirely clear answers, but we're going to try to, get you at the most clarity possible. And yeah, let me just go ahead and introduce our panelists. We have Juan Carlos Gomez.
Just director of immigration and human rights. The rest is this.
I'll give his full bio.
No.
He is the
Can I make it
professor.
up? Wait, can I make it up? I cut the grass over here. Like the grass. I take tips. I'm available on Saturday mornings to cut grass. I mean, I need a raise. I'm not, can you negotiate? So, I'm a lawyer. I've been a lawyer since before the founding of the country. And that'll get one of the immigration dinosaurs in the community. Is that okay?
Yeah, he's been defending, individuals in immigration matters for over 30 years, and he's represented people before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, as well as the U.S. Department of Justice and Homeland Security. And yeah, he is director of the East Little Havana Legal Services, where he led a team of attorneys to resolve the series of problems faced by clients, and he coordinated teams of attorneys in multi-forum conflicts to effectively resolve clients' problems. He knows what he's doing. If you have questions for an immigration attorney, he's very, very well-versed. Dario Gomez is the ACLU of Florida's Immigrant Justice Organizer based in Miami-Dade. He started with the ACLU of Florida as a high school volunteer from Broward for the Immigrant Justice Organization in 2021, and has since organized around voting rights and immigrants' rights in Miami-Dade. He is also a senior at FIU. Go Panthers. Majoring in sociology and comes from a proud Dominican-American immigrant family. Yeah.
You really want to hear me?
Okay, two Gomez's in Miami on the same panel. Isn't that quite a miracle? No? You're looking at me very seriously. I'm very concerned.
Renata Bozetto is the Deputy Director of the Florida Immigrant Coalition, also known as FLIC, and it's a statewide organization growing the connection, capacity, and consciousness of communities to strengthen pro-immigrant power in Florida. She's a Brazilian immigrant who has been making Florida a home since 2004, and she joined FLIC as a volunteer in 2010. Prior to joining FLIC's team, she worked as a teaching assistant and instructor at South Florida Public Universities. She received her MA in Women and Gender Studies from Florida Atlantic University and her PhD in sociology from Florida International University. Today, she is proud to be part of the movement that is making Florida a true home for immigrants and all. And then Alana Greer is the director and co-founder of the Community Justice Project. As a movement lawyer, she supports community-led campaigns for racial justice and human rights. She has represented groups like the Florida Immigrant Coalition in challenging the entanglement of local policing and ICE since 2017. And last, but certainly not least, our chief of police at FIU, Alexander Casas, has been the chief for 14 years. And before that, he worked at Miami-Dade Police Department, now the Sheriff's Office, for 21 years. He is an FIU alum, go Panthers, and he studied criminal justice. He also is a professor here and teaches a class called the History of Organized Crime. And he has a master's in leadership science from Nova Southeastern University. So thank you guys all for joining us. I think for the first half, we're going to talk to the panelists and I'm going to ask some questions. And then the second half, we're planning to open up the conversation. You can either raise your hand and I'll call on you and there'll be a couple microphones going around, or if you have a question you want to ask but you are shy and don't want to speak into a microphone, you can go ahead and write a question on an index card and send that out my way and I can ask that question on your behalf. Okay, so I guess my first question, maybe for Alana, is just what is this 287G agreement? It's a contract between the FIU Police Department and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, but can you just give us a quick kind of definition of what this is?
So these agreements functionally empower different police agencies to sign up and specific officers in those agencies to use the powers to become ICE agents in certain capacities. And specifically, it lets these local police officers make arrests that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to make on civil immigration offenses. It lets them do that not only at the direct instruction of ICE, but also in the field, as well as giving them powers to do things like interrogate people that they have suspicions of being undocumented or here unlawfully. And otherwise, local police, under the U.S. Constitution, do not have the power to make those arrests. There's not a crime at issue. They're otherwise not empowered. There's been various models of these throughout the country over the last over a decade. This particular model that we're seeing play out here in Florida, this task force model, is the highest level of delegation. And it was actually tried before and was a very big failure, policy-wise and implementation-wise. In 2012, it was actually transitioned out. They stopped this program in large part because of not only its failure to have any safety measures and increased safety as a result of these collaborations, but also really rampant abuses. They saw racial profiling really harming the community, and litigation against these local police officers that those cities and those local taxpayers were on the hook for at the end of the day. So we saw a lot of violations of due process as a result, and this model has been reintroduced back into empower officers on the streets in our communities.
Yeah, and so just a little bit of response to that, there's been a number of universities, public universities in the state of Florida that have recently decided to enter into these agreements. And, maybe Chief Casas, you can talk a little bit about why, for you, it was important to decide to have your police force enter into this agreement, which will mean that some of the FIU police officers who you will decide will be trained to enforce immigration law, which historically, without this agreement, is something that only federal agents could enforce.
So, the decision to enter the 287G agreement, understanding what was going on in the country and the state, and the emphasis that was being placed on immigration enforcement, I believe that our FIUPD should be the touch point for that to our FIU community. I didn't want to not have the ability to interact with our FIU community when we came to this. I didn't want to see the ability or the impetus or any initiative to another law enforcement agency to come in to our community and conduct this type of enforcement. If I don't enter that agreement, I don't even have that option. By entering the agreement, I'm hoping that they will refer to us and let us do that enforcement for them because they're asking for that help as a force multiplier. Absent that, I don't even have an opinion on the matter with that. So I think out of concern for our FA community and to continue to police our community the way that you're used to us policing you, which if you look back, I think you'll find it is very different than the typical relationships communities have with their police departments. And having done it at other places, I can attest that it's just different here than other places. I wanted to stay in that position to at least have some say in how those decisions and how that enforcement was executed here on our campus.
Yeah, and I kind of did have a follow-up question. In reading through the Memorandum of Understanding, which we do have a couple copies of here, and also if anybody's interested, there is a template of that agreement on the ICE website, so that's open to everybody if they would like to read it. And also to be clear, the FIU Police Department has sent their intent and are still waiting a response
That's correct.
from ICE. So it has not started yet, and the officers do need to be trained before, they will start taking on this new role. But kind of in follow-up to your question about wanting to sort of be in the driver's seat, in reading that agreement, it seems very clear to me that everything that you do kind of has to be in collaboration with ICE. You're supposed to call ICE as soon as you start to enforce anything. And so it seems like they are still ultimately going to be in control. Why not just let them do their job and you do yours, which is to keep the campus community safe?
So that control you're talking about is toward the end of the process. I want to be there when we interact with our community. That initial interaction, the knocking on your door, the finding out that you have a warrant, the transporting you to a detention center. I want it to be FIU PD, not an outside agency doing that. The interaction will be just very, very different with us. I would hope the interaction is very different with us than it would be with other law enforcement agencies that just don't know us. They don't know the FIU community. And the way it stands now, if we run into somebody who has a judicial warrant or an order of detention, we would notify ICE and we would just have to wait for them to get there, or we would take them to the local jail, who would then hold them on their behalf. Us entering this agreement, once we get trained and we understand the details of how that is going to actually work, it gives us a lot more interaction, a lot more input, and a lot more involvement in the overall process.
Okay, so I'm hoping that you can kind of, and I'm gonna be asking a lot of questions to the chief because he is kind
Yeah, I
of,
should have said no.
the head of the department. But I was hoping you could walk us through what an encounter with an officer, who has been trained as part of this program would look like. So if I were a student and I was on campus and I was really late to class and I drove recklessly and I was speeding and an officer stopped me, for example, would I potentially be asked about my residency? Would I have my criminal record checked?
Without having the agreement executed and hanging off the train, I can't answer that question. But and that's the truth, I'd be making it up otherwise, because as I was gonna say, the way that will happen today on any other kind of criminal stop, if we stop you for running a stop sign here on campus, and we're gonna write you a ticket, and we check your history as we're writing a ticket, if you have a warrant for your arrest, we will take you into custody. It's really no different than that.
Okay, so if I happened to be an undocumented student on campus, and there was an order of deportation on my record, that would come up in the system, you would see that, and then I would be arrested by a FIU Police Department officer, detained and transferred by FIU PD to a detention center.
Either the detention center or it could be TDK, wherever we are designated to take. Yeah.
Okay,
But that would happen today, even outside that agreement.
okay.
It would be no different.
Okay, and, what will you do to prevent officers from racially profiling people who they think might look illegal?
The same thing that we do today to prevent profiling, racial profiling from anything related to criminal law enforcement. We have to abide by the Constitution. We have SOPs that govern that we conduct ourselves. We have accountability. If there's an issue that goes and you don't agree with what we're doing, we have a mechanism to make that complaint. We train our officers not just on racial profiling, but on implicit biases, the biases that could lead them to inadvertently, without realizing it's a profile. We don't have that issue here on our campus when it comes to profiling based on race, sex, ethnicity, and it won't change regardless of what law it is that we're enforcing. That standard will never change.
Okay, and Chief Casas also spoke to some faculty maybe a month ago, and he mentioned during that he's going to choose his best officers to participate in the program and be trained. And I was just thinking, if I were a student on campus, how would I know whether an officer was trained to act as an immigration agent, essentially, to act as an ICE agent, or whether they were just a normal FIUP? Are they gonna have some kind of badge or something on them to physically, separate or identify them?
No. We won't.
So there won't be any way to know.
No different than your being able to look at an officer and try to figure out how much training they've had, what are their specialties. No, our officers all wear the same uniform.
And could a student ask an officer, hey, are you trained as part of 287G to act as an ICE agent? Is that a question that somebody could ask an officer if they see them on campus?
You could ask any officer you see on campus any question you want.
And would they be obliged to respond?
Depends on the interaction. There's no obligation to respond. It has to do with the interaction you have with that officer.
All right, let me ask Alana to my right. There have been examples across the country of errors in Immigration and Customs Enforcement, in ICE, and Department of Homeland Security databases. Based on the template of this agreement, FIU Police Department, the officers that have been trained as part of this program, will have access to Department of Homeland Security and ICE databases. And, we have seen examples again of errors with these databases. Can you talk a little bit about some of these errors that we've seen in the past? And are you concerned at all about the impact this may have on students with varying legal statuses? We know at FIU we have students who are DACA recipients, also known as dreamers, who maybe came to this country at a young age, and they, have deferred action for childhood arrival, so they are not supposed to be deported. And there's also students with temporary protected status. There's ongoing litigation with that. The Supreme Court just this week, made a decision regarding that, and it seems it's going to be expiring soon. Can you just talk about kind of these varying legal statuses and kind of any concerns you might have?
So there's not one magic database that says definitively these folks have citizenship status or other types of lawful presence in the United States. And so the different sets of information are not only complete, but require an extreme amount of expertise to really be able to parse and to make a determination, and often a judge to make that determination, right? And so most of the ICE enforcement that we see in communities on the street is happening not because it has been vetted by a judge or there has been a verification of this many levels of information, but because a bureaucrat at ICE decided based on limited information and often incorrect information to issue what's called an administrative warrant, right? So no judge has checked this. What we've seen firsthand here in Florida, our colleagues at the ACLU for many years now have been representing a U.S. citizen that popped up in one of these databases and then was held unlawfully in local prisons in Monroe County. Just a few weeks ago, we worked with the family of a U.S.-born citizen who was visibly Latino, who didn't speak English particularly well, and the police decided that he wasn't born here, even though he had his license on him. And even though his mother brought his passport and his social security number and everything you could think of to prove that everyone in the court acknowledged, yes, it's a citizen, but this database is telling us something different. So all the actors in that room for over 24 hours said, well, we'll just ship him off to a nice facility 9 hours away and they'll figure it out. And so there's really serious consequences to how bad these databases are and to entering people into the system, right, and to passing the buck like that. It's so bad that folks in both New York and California had sued about this, and sued that the fact that these were so bad that using them was a violation of due process, and had to settle that case for millions and millions of dollars and major reforms that unfortunately don't impact us here in Florida. But I think tell the story of these same databases are not only what's being used by ICE, but with officers with much less training than those officers are now being asked to interpret, to rely on, that we know have a track record of getting all sorts of people wrapped up into a process Folks who may have had previous issues that may have made them arrestable, but now have a pending asylum application. I know Juan could probably speak much more eloquently than I to those nuances. But it really is a frightening thing for them to rely on this data with the serious consequences and realities people are being put into if they're entering into the system.
Thank you so much. And kind of what I'm hearing from Alana is that, you know, these DHS and ICE databases have, you know, issues with not always being correct, and that ultimately it's the judge that will determine, you know, what is going to happen. I'm curious, in Florida right now, what are the wait times like for people to see, to actually like have their case heard in front of a judge?
You've given me the perfect opportunity to clarify something. My version of know your rights. If you know someone who is about to be detained by ICE, the first thing you do is you tell them, sign absolutely nothing. You do not know what you're signing. So always tell people that unless you know what you're signing, don't sign it. Because we've seen in some jurisdictions where ICE has gotten people to sign away their right to appear before an immigration judge. And there's a form that is referred to as a notice to appear, which is the charging document in immigration proceedings, immigration court proceedings. And the thing is that you need to, A, not sign anything, because if you say, if they tell you, oh, you'll be out of custody faster, the truth is that yes, you'll be out of custody faster because you're not going to go through proceedings. You just waive your appearance before an immigration judge. So I want to appear before an immigration judge, and I want to speak to a lawyer, and do not sign anything. And the reason for that is that you don't know what you're doing. Now, especially since the federal government is criminalizing regular civil immigration processes. So invoke your right to counsel. Do not sign anything. One of the problems we have in immigration right now is that ICE is relying on numbers, not on degrees of offenses. So they've been instructed, this is your number, and they're detained. And one of the problems with that is that you have regular people, and depending, and we all know that the further north you go in Florida, the further south you are, no disrespect to those of you from the northern part of Florida. Again, really, if you want to become the 51st state, we're fine with that. I'm kidding, we love you. Don't we all love you, the North Floridians? So, the thing is that this is a problem because, you see, there are so many degrees of status and lack of status. DACA, for example, is not a status. Any form of deferred action is not a status. In other states, we've seen where kids who have special immigrant juvenile visas pending, they have deferred action and ICE has taken them into custody. And so the thing is, you have to please go out there and share in the community that everyone is vulnerable. Anyone who is not a citizen is vulnerable. And we've seen it in other places where you have stops, sort of little roadblocks, that they've asked Hispanics, why aren't you driving or walking around with your passport? And the answer is, because I don't have to. I'm a citizen, why should I? And the thing is, we have to shed light on that through the media. Now, the one thing is that if you know you're vulnerable, we have to act strategically. People voted, our own people voted against us, for goodness sake. And I'm very clear about that. And now we have to survive the next 2 or 4 years until we have some restraint on this insanity, understanding that the courts are the place to go. It really, when you are out there, and we tell our clients all the time, please be careful. please be careful, because the truth is that we have very limited tools to protect you. I'll give you a scenario. There is a problem where the administration is now getting ICE to terminate removal proceedings or dismiss removal proceedings for people in one of two circumstances, and we're not clear because you've seen the instability every single day. In the laws as they're applied are applied arbitrarily and randomly every day. And one of the problems is if they move to dismiss, then there's nothing before the immigration court to protect you, and they can put you through expedited proceedings. The second part of that is that you need to ask to speak to an asylum officer. But just so that you see how poorly things are, that they have now centralized the critical fear system so that there is one unit interviewing people in different regions. So you're not talking to someone who might be from a local field office. People who have been selected to be in this unit are out there conducting these interviews. And we've seen, because we saw it 2017 to 2021, that the standards were raised to a higher level. So we have to be aware of what is the reality we're facing at the federal level and at the state level. Now, can I add one more thing? That my concern is that we have to act strategically and defensively. Those of you who can help others, do so. If you know someone who doesn't have a driver's license and you can drive, think of the bus boycotts. If you can drive someone, now they say, oh, you're driving someone illegally. Really? You don't have to ask somebody what their status is to give them a ride. If you know that they don't have a license, you know they don't have a license. Help them. Let's protect ourselves and be as safe as we can, understanding the reality of what we're facing. And just a pitch for the lawyers, help the organizations like Alana Situation, like FLIC, like American Center for Injustice, like Catholic Charities Legal Services, to represent people. Most people don't have representation.
Well, I hope that that was helpful, especially regarding, the idea that it seems like from his perspective, it's in the best interest of people, if they are detained, to not sign anything and to act collectively and help your fellow colleagues out.
It's not, it's why on earth would you sign something you don't know what you're signing? If you don't believe, even if you're reading, what the hell are you signing? Something that you don't know.
Don't sign anything that you are not aware of what you're signing. Okay. I wanted to ask our student on the panel, when we're talking about the fact that these DHS and ICE databases sometimes can have errors in them, what is your response to that? How does that make you feel? And also I wanted to ask you, since you are representing ACLU, if there are any actionable pieces of advice that you wanted to share with the audience in terms of things that your organization is advising people who may be concerned for themselves or concerned for their friends or family or anybody, who could be impacted by these changes.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll answer the first question first. I think that I'm really proud to be an FIU student because I feel like our student body is one of the most engaged politically, socially, and we're the most aware of what's going on. So I don't think that any of us, especially sitting in this room today, are caught off guard by hearing that these databases are so faulty, because we're seeing in the news left and right people being falsely detained by ICE, falsely deported without having access to due process. Like my fellow Gomez was saying, there's so many arbitrary decisions being made that are having real permanent impacts on people's lives, on students' lives. You know, I think it's a little bit corny to say it, but it's true. Like, international is our middle name. And I came to this school because I was so proud of that, and I wanted to be somewhere that respected and protected its international student body. I think a lot of us probably made the decision to study here because of that. So to know that our local police department, our officers being charged with keeping us safe, are now going to be relying on faulty databases to conduct this kind of enforcement is really scary. And I know a lot of students personally who have made the decision to not continue their education here because of that. I know students who are worried for their family members, you know, students who are citizens but are worried that somewhere or the other their family members might also be targeted if they're getting picked up here at FIU. Like, if they bring their family members to their graduation. Like, these are all real scenarios that we should all be able to enjoy as students who have worked really hard to graduate without the additional fear that our police officers, our security guards that apparently we won't even know if they're trained to be immigration enforcement officers, that are going to be standing outside the graduation ceremony. You know, like, these are all like very real situations that people are asking about. And so to hear that these databases are not trustworthy, even though it's not surprising to me, I think it just reinforces the fact that we should not be giving any of our police officers here on campus access to that and giving them the means to work off of that database. We have so many dreamers here at FIU. I would say it's safe to say we're probably one of the schools with the most. We have so many people here on TPS, we have so many people here on these different legal but fragile statuses right now that are very, very much worried about having that taken away at any moment, and, you know, them only becoming a target for this kind of enforcement. And then, you know, under this current state administration, earlier this year, SB 2C was passed in the Florida legislature, revoking in-state tuition from undocumented students, but that also includes recipients of DACA, right? Dreamers who again have been studying here their whole lives. I know a few of them, so it just makes me very angry to know that they are, you know, unable to continue their educational career. So yeah, I would say that as a student, it makes me scared, it makes me angry, and it is kind of spitting in the face of why I came to this university in the first place. So that's me as a student. And then quickly to answer your question, we have some resources at our table back there, but I'll quickly share that the most important thing you can do right now is learn about what your rights are, and also teach others about what their rights are. I mean, like, we all probably know an immigrant that goes to FIU, either that works here, that's a student here. Not everybody has had the opportunity or has been shown what their rights are, what they should do. We actually have some really great like zines that our partners at Florida Student Power Network made, so please take one. It goes over what you should do in different scenarios. And then of course, just make sure that you're speaking up, make sure that you use your voice, especially because there's a lot of people who can't right now.
Thank you so much. So we often hear people saying, know your rights, but what are your rights? I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about what those rights are.
Okay, I will start, although I always prefer our friends attorneys to talk about the rights. First, I think I need to make a comment as an alumna. Is that I think the reason why this room is packed is because we all want Panthers to be recognized by academic excellence, by innovation, by research. None of us wants to come to a university or leave with a diploma associated with racial profiling, lack of trust, and that's what 287G agreements are. So for me, it's very important to be here and to know that the university community is very clear that this voluntary agreement should not move forward.
I just wanted you to clarify, there is a law in the state, there's been a lot of changing laws in the state and federally, as we know, that says that sheriff's offices are required by law to sign on to the 287G agreement, which means that in the jails, the officers there will be acting as ICE agents and can enforce immigration laws. Other local law enforcement agencies across the state have been signing on to these agreements voluntarily. The governor has been vocal in his encouraging of the law enforcement agencies to sign on. But can you talk about whether or not this is voluntary? And again, let's get back to the question of what people's rights are. And I want to ask that question for students, for a faculty member, and also for other staff on campus, whether it be custodial staff, people working in the library, people working in the dining halls, any person on campus.
Okay, so let's go. I will repeat. For the FIU police, this is a voluntary agreement. Voluntary means voluntary. That means it is the chief and the university's choice to do so. And obviously, as we can see, against the university community's position, will, and desire. So the thing is, with 287G agreements, I also want to connect with the Know Your Rights that Chief Casas mentioned, the intention of being on the driver's seat. And this is how it connects with Know Your Rights. The reality is, anyone can enter a private space, including us. Regardless of who is in the driver's seat, in a private space, and that means if this is not private space, public space, correct myself. In a public space, anyone can enter, including us. That means if this is a public event, Chief Casas is on the driver's seat, but ICE can come here and they can act, which means that there are multiple drivers happening at the same time in the university public spaces. The second part of Know Your Rights, you need to understand private spaces. Private spaces, the understanding that we have from our lawyers, and you correct me if you need to, is that you can only enter with consent or a judicial warrant. Judicial warrant is signed by a judge, is issued by the court, and it's signed by a judge. An administrative warrant, as Alana mentioned, is signed by a bureaucrat. It's a choice that can be made very often on the fly. And as I understand the task force agreements, even would give them the opportunity to work their own warrants. So that means the due process, the accountability, the checks and balances that you expect from a judicial system that will first define whether or not you should be detained before you are detained, doesn't happen. Doesn't happen with an administrative warrant. So if ICE was to show up at my house or at a private office, and they want to enter, but they don't have a judicial warrant, I have the right to not consent them to enter. Does that preclude them from doing so? Does that mean that they will not try to break the door or break the garage? We all saw videos of it happening. We saw them breaking car windows. So the fact that I have rights doesn't mean that they will not be violated. And that is the scary part. So the right that I need to be very, very mindful of, that applies to all of us, undocumented or not, is that I have the right to remain silent. Should not say anything, period. If I imagine that a lawyer will practice their right to remain silent, and me, who I am not a lawyer, will practice my right to remain silent. The right to remain silent is one. The other is that they should not search my things, my car, my house, my purse, if they don't have a probable cause, or which is a real reason to believe that I am carrying something that I should not be carrying, or that I committed something wrong. So, right to remain silent. If you are asked questions, ask to talk to your attorney. Ask if you're free to go. If you're not under arrest and are not being detained, you should be able to leave. And if they say that you can leave, just walk away. If they say that you cannot, ask for your attorney.
And what about a common attorney?
You can call the FLIC hotline, which is 1-888-600-5762. Our hotline is from 7 to 7 every day, but we do take messages, call back, and we provide referrals and contact as part of the RAISE. RAISE is the Rapid Response Alliance for Immigrant Safety and Empowerment. That Rapid Response Alliance is a collective that ACLU is part of, CJP is part of, and many other organizations, the Americans for Immigrant Justice, that includes attorneys, legal observers, as well as organizations that are here working collaboratively to ensure that everybody's safe.
Wait, I wanted to do one thing. Can you repeat the phone number one more time, clearly? In case anybody wants to write this down to share with other people or anything like that.
And I'll give a couple options. On your phone, on your browser, we have a web browser, a web-based app that is RAISE, RAISE.is. RAISE.is, not only you have know your rights information, but you can also see the hotline phone number right now. The phone number for the hotline, 1-888-600-5762. And lastly, you can go to FLIC's website, flic.org. We have a Know Your Rights information, Know Your Rights section, where you can see Know Your Right cards in multiple languages. And you also have our hotline there anytime if you forget the number.
This is nice. You realize the 11th Circuit turns off the light, turns on the light, and they keep talking. So. So this is the issue. See, they don't have to come into your house. They don't have to come into the school. They don't have to go into the church. They can do it outside. And I don't want to give a false sense of security. The truth is that administrative warrants are issued simultaneously with the charging documents. And we technically, a charging document is the notice to appear when they put you in removal proceedings. So the truth is that we shouldn't have a false sense of security, because all of these rights about them coming into your house or the car, the problem is that everyone in this country at this point who is in this situation is vulnerable, is dangerous. But then the second question is, they can also use what's called reasonable suspicion. And so we are technically within the 25 miles of the border here. And so a moving vehicle, a person who has committed any kind of traffic infraction, you begin to open the door. If they are inventorying the vehicle, you never know the many ways. And the problem is that people need to understand the vulnerable situation that we are in. And having discussions about know your rights with all due respect, the only thing that will eliminate 287G is changing the state legislature, is changing Congress, is changing the White House. Really, as one of the attorneys who has been one of the few attorneys, I can tell you, and Alana will agree with me, most people are unrepresented because there simply aren't the resources out there. And that's not the backlog, it's the backlog saves some people. But the individuals, the resources to have attorneys, and it makes a significant difference. It was shown in New York in the Second Circuit, the significant difference that it makes to have people represented. The problem is that our community has not valued representation enough and has not invested in getting attorneys.
to people who need them, who deserve them. But now,
Yeah, yes.
I just want to say, just to clarify, even if you don't have an attorney, you can still ask to speak to an attorney. Anything you say after that can be used against you in court. So don't think that you need to call the hotline first and then say that. You can just say, I'd like to speak to an attorney.
Thank you, everybody. So I wanted to ask the chief, are you going to only act on a judicial warrant, which is a warrant signed by a federal judge, or an administrative warrant? Or will you be asking people if there is some reasonable suspicion about their residency status on campus? You, meaning your training force.
The only reason we would enter into any immigration-related investigation is if we have probable cause to do so. Coming across you, like you gave the example of going to a commencement, I can't do that. Even if I wanted, if that was a rogue officer, I couldn't do that, it's illegal. I have to have lawful standing to be able to do these things that we're talking about. We also gave the example of breaking the windows to get someone out. But we gave the example when we were talking about administrative warrant. You can't do that on an administrative warrant. You could do a judicial warrant if you're resisting arrest. So without knowing the whole scenario, I think it's unfair to paint that picture and create this much greater concern. It's just not gonna happen. We can't do that.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is that if you are a student or a staff member or a parent or a visitor on campus, what the chief is saying is that without an administrative warrant or a judicial warrant or some probable cause, him and his officers who have been trained will not be stalking people and asking them about their residency. Is that correct?
You can't do it. You're correct. You can't do that. It's against the Constitution.
Okay, because I was reading through the memorandum of understanding, and we're all here trying to understand this together, and so I want to give Renata a chance to respond to that.
So I have more of a question, because one thing is when things are going good. When things are going good and no trouble, very good. The problem is, imagine me trying to park on campus, which I remember those days, and fight happens that somebody wants my parking spot, and I'm going to that parking spot, and they hit my car, and they are wrong. Campus police shows up, and they see that my license is outdated, because my status, I was one of the Venezuelans who had a work permit, had a status, did everything right, but because of the executive action, I lost my status, could not renew my driver's license. This is a real case that can happen. In the context that we are reading at this moment, it's a real case that can happen. So I want to understand, Chief, what would happen with that person if that person is now in the database? They didn't commit any infraction, they were a victim of one, but they are in the database.
So in the example you give, you're driving a vehicle without a valid driver's license. That's a crime. And if we arrest you for driving without a valid driver's license, when we conduct a criminal history check, whatever's in there will show up.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that if somebody comes in contact with a law enforcement officer and their criminal background check is run and it shows up that they do have some kind of criminal record, regardless of whether it may be something that was dismissed or what have you, if that situation, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, you could arrest and detain somebody.
No, the example we were talking about is you don't have a valid driver's license. It's illegal to drive without a driver's license.
So I have a follow-up.
Okay.
I have a follow-up. So then we are correct, right? That person is driving without a license, so that person has a issue. My question is, are we okay with that person being deported, because of that violation, because I think what is at stake when we are thinking about community and how people can fall into the traps of the immigration system, how they can fall into the traps. And having a license, by the way, is not something, there are 19 states that don't have that problem that Florida does. It's also a choice that Florida has. To not issue license to individuals who are qualified drivers. So the question that I have is, what happens with a person who doesn't have an unregulated immigration status?
Doesn't have a what?
An unregulated immigration status. A person who is not undocumented.
Nothing will happen to them. The example you gave of someone who's driving without a lawful license, which is an illegal act.
Mm-hmm.
When we check our criminal history and we find that judicial warrant, we would arrest them for that judicial warrant.
Not a judicial warrant. I'm talking about immigration.
Or detain or whatever.
Yeah.
If that happened today and we weren't trained by ICE or deputized by ICE, we would hold them for ICE to come and get them.
Mm-hmm.
Or we would take them to jail. We would take them to jail for the arrest of the driver's license, and the jail would hold them until ICE came and got them.
And then if that person didn't have an ICE hold, that person was not undocumented, what would happen to that person?
If we arrested them for driving without a license,
It would
they
hurt.
would go to jail.
They would go to jail
And there's no hold or anything, nothing happens.
but
I'm looking at it.
No, the way 27G works is that the people are picked up, when you are arrested, you go to the county jail or to TDK,
Right.
and then within 48 hours, there's a hold. If a hold is placed, then the issue now is that ICE place a hold on anybody, on everybody. And the county and the detention centers are filled with people with driving without a license. It's the enforcement, the 27G enforcement, the moment you put them in the system, that's when ICE itself checks everybody. And depending on the administration and power, there are different priorities. Now everybody goes, and that's the problem.
I think I recognize that I complicate, but what I am trying to say here, and as a community member, is that a issue that I'm not saying it's right, the issue of driving without a license. I'm saying that some people are trapped on that issue. And that is an issue that is resolved through one avenue when you are a citizen or somebody with a regulated status. And it has incredibly harsh punishment to somebody who is without status. And that difference in punishment, the situation in which a person can be banned from living with their families, can be separated from their families, can be sent to another country, can be in El Salvador without contact. That for me is baffling. So maybe we got on the driving without a license because it is an issue, right? I wanna be very clear. Lots of people are facing that issue not by their choice, but they could also have a valid license and have a hold because of a deportation order for years ago. If I had not mentioned driving without a license, the reality is there wouldn't be an argument. That person would be on the deportation pipeline the same way without having committed a crime.
The problem with that is, when anybody goes into the system, they go on the radar. And this is the problem here. The only thing, again, 27G is out there. And the problem is the moment that someone is booked and put into the system in the county jail, or that's the thing, when a person goes into the system. Now, we need to figure out survival mechanisms so that when people need to figure out how we survive this, this is not, we are going through a hurricane. It is not a smart thing understanding that you can stop it. the idea is that we need to think strategically on how people can survive this, because there are people, and you have to understand now, the reality today is people reporting to Miramar, to ICE, are not leaving, they're being picked up. When people are going to immigration court, they are now also often being picked up. When people are going to interviews at CIS, sometimes they're being picked up. And so the thing is that there are many ways of being caught on the radar, and I'm not suggesting that people break the law, but we have to think and we have to be aware, because one of the things that scares me, and we see it in the legal profession, that there are people out there advertising garbage, misstating the law on social media, misstating the law on, what is that thing called, TikTok? It is nonsense. It is nonsense what some lawyers, what some people are telling other people. Last week there was an announcement that said that you could get your residency in the U.S. based on some new program. There are no new programs. But the thing is, there's a lot of misinformation. So those of you who are informed have to help protect those who don't know better.
Chief, I wanted to ask you, and I touched on this before, do you plan to utilize the Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Department of Homeland Security databases that you will now have access to as part of this agreement if everything goes through and once the officers are trained, which, by the way, from my understanding, it's a 40-hour online training as it stands. Things are moving very quickly, but my understanding is that it's an online 40-hour training, and there are a few universities in Florida so far whose officers have already been trained, as well as local law enforcement agencies. I know Coral Gables, Hialeah, Doral, Sweetwater have signed 287G agreements. But I'm wondering, do you plan to utilize these databases to proactively look for criminals on campus? Are you concerned that there are people who may be breaking the law, and do you plan to use those databases to proactively find people who may have a criminal record or some type of order for deportation?
The scenario that you present it couldn't happen even if we wanted to. And the reason it can is the only access that I have to educational records has to be for legitimate educational purpose. We have no way of cross-referencing the two databases to put people on the radar or to flag them, whatever. It can't happen.
Okay, because, sorry? Okay, because,
I mean, that's if I'm understanding the question correct.
yeah,
Okay.
I think you are. I think that's a great clarification for the audience. So what I'm understanding you say is that you are not going to take a list of students, say, that you have and put that into the DHS database and find students who may be undocumented.
Right.
Okay. All right, so there's different types of 287G agreements, and I'll going to explain.
Sure. I think it's maybe helpful to understand, I think the previous conversation you and Renata, Chief, were having makes it really clear that these agreements, fundamentally, what they are about is increasing the capacity of ICE to speed this deportation pipeline along. And that they're doing that by increasing the contact points, right, between our community and ICE. There used to be a narrative that was about, this is about criminals, a problematic narrative, I think, but a narrative that was the point. Right now, they're looking for any contact points that they can get folks into this pipeline, right? And right now, this university is a contact point. That is the unfortunate reality of our life. There previously had been other models that our county jails have. So models where folks, if you are arrested and otherwise released, so maybe the charges are dropped, maybe you paid your bond, maybe you served your sentence. At that point, when you're otherwise free to go under the U.S. Constitution, they decide to hold you for up to 48 hours for ICE to pick you up. Sometimes ICE comes, sometimes they don't. There's a higher level of jails where, called jail enforcement model, where I think like you were talking about with these databases, jail officers will be more proactive in interrogating folks and creating those charging documents if they didn't already exist. And this model that we're all dealing with now is about what happens in our parking lots, in our classrooms, in our community. And the goal of this administration is really to make that really deeply seated in all these points of our lives. And I just want to add one thing, because I know living here in Miami and Florida, it feels overwhelming and so fast that these things are happening, these agreements. This is not the norm. There's only 161 agreements in the country right now at these local levels, so not sheriffs, not state agencies, just these local police officers, agencies. 143 of them are here in Florida. There are only 28 other police agencies in the whole country at this local level that have decided that they want to explore this. The other states with the highest are Pennsylvania and New Hampshire, they have 6 each. There is nowhere else in the country where universities are considering this and moving to this. This is extremely, we're living in a very extreme experiment and laboratory right now. And I think I saw some power users I know there's folks here from the education school. We saw in Pinellas County K-12 police thinking about this, right? And so this is an intrusion that feels really intimidating and scary right now. It is very scary. And I think it is an attempt to move the Overton window that much farther, right? This is not going to be the end of where they're going to try to push intrusion when those numbers, starting those quotas start to come up short.
With a bond, if someone is arrested, don't post a bond. If there's an ICE hold on you, don't post a bond, because first talk to an immigration lawyer and notify an immigration lawyer to scramble to see if you can get a bond. Now, you have to remember about the recent passage of Laken Riley. And so just being charged with a theft offense is a problem. Being charged with a so-called crime offense, a violence offense. We have to be very careful because that law is so beyond unconstitutional. But, and that's my opinion, that one is my opinion. But the thing here is that before people, because people want their relative to be released, but they don't understand that the moment you'll be released, then you're picked up by ICE. So before you post a bond, make sure and speak to, if you can't afford a criminal attorney, there's a public defender. Speak to the public defender, and each public defender's office has immigration specialists, and we work with various public defender's offices to guide them on what are the accurate immigration consequences of an arrest and of a plea. But people need to be informed, and I know that people become scared and desperate, and they say, no, I want to post a bond for my son. No, don't do that. Because if you do that, then you're moving them from state custody to ICE custody, and ICE can move them from here to New Mexico, to Arizona, to wherever the hell they want. And the problem is that this makes it very difficult to represent people. So keep that in mind.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So the reason that there's an awareness initially of the 287G agreement at FIU is that I emailed the administration and asked them, and they let me know that you had signed the memorandum of understanding and that you had an intent to enter this agreement. And so I'm curious, it sounds like you don't know when you're going to get a response from ICE, but how are you going to inform the community when the training has begun, or when the officers are training and has gone into effect? Is there should they follow you on TikTok, or?
I'm not on TikTok. I ain't gonna lie. And actually, we can't use TikTok on campus, by the way. You know, if we want to. Yeah, you gotta go across the street to use it. There's some kind of buffer or something. I have an agreement with the faculty senate president to keep him informed of our progress, and through our student government association president, and I intend to continue to do that. I've been informed all along as we progress. For example, when we went from, when we sent the email, the memorandum of understanding, and we hadn't shown up on a participating agency list yet. As soon as we did, I let them know.
Okay. So it sounds like the faculty union.
The faculty senate,
The
which
faculty senate.
worked with the communicate, and then to the government association.
Okay, so stay tuned. And do you consider anyone who is not a legal resident a criminal or a threat to the safety and security of the campus community?
So whether I consider something or not is a luxury that I don't have as a police officer. We have a duty to enforce the laws. If you commit a crime, we have to enforce that crime. And that's, poo-poo it if you want, but that really is the burden of being a police officer, is our ability to separate our opinion or how we feel about something from our duty to enforce the law.
So if somebody is not a legal resident, you would have to enforce the law.
So if someone was here legally and they had a judicial order or a warrant, something that required us to enforce that law, yes, we would have to.
And would you make any type of promise to only act on warrants, to only act on either judicial or administrative warrants, and to not proactively seek out these criminals on campus?
The only assurance I can make you is that we will not profile, and we will always act under the color of law and under the Constitution.
And we spoke briefly before, and I thought it was really interesting when you were talking to me a little bit about what exactly it means to racially profile and under what conditions or circumstances you can ask somebody about their legal status, and what is probable cause. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I would have to have probable cause to believe that someone was here legally. What that is, I couldn't tell you. The scenario will happen, because the devil's in the details. I couldn't give you the general or the textbook scenario. It really is a case-by-case basis.
But you won't only be acting on warrants, you also could act on probable cause.
We could act on probable cause.
Is there any follow-up question on the panel? If not, we're gonna go to some
With being detained right now is when you have TPS, when you have DACA, when you're a resident, it's the issue, and you have the other situations where people have orders of removal, even orders of deportation, orders of exclusion from the early 90s. I got that. The issue is that people need to understand that the moment you get on ICE's radar, that's where your biggest problem is in the immigration sense. Because one of the problems that we see in what I mentioned is, the policy is guilt by deportation. Because a lot of people who are taken by ICE never have a chance to defend themselves in criminal court. And that's where the major problem is. Because you're accused of a crime, but you're taken into ICE custody, and then if you don't have an immigration solution, then they will offer you either an immediate order of deportation, maybe voluntary departure, but the thing is that you never got to clear your name. So this false statement from the federal administration, from the president's administration, that if you leave, you can come back, that's a lie. Because you can't come back. If you have a pending case, then that's going to be a discretionary factor that's used against you at a consular post. If you think that you're coming back after having been here unlawfully for more than a year, then you're inadmissible. You need a waiver, and if you are trying to get an immigrant visa and you don't have a qualified relative, parents or spouses or citizens or residents, you're not getting a waiver, you're not coming back. So there are lies coming from the government administration. If you deport yourself, you can come back. No, you can't. And so let's see where we see the problems and fight them. Because this is clearly a violation of the right to counsel, the right to a jury trial, the right to due process. That's where the problem is, because immigration is being used to deny people due process.
Okay, so we're gonna get into, questions from the community. I just have one last question, and I'm just curious about, liability for the university and also for the officers. I imagine that if I, decided to join the FIU Police Department, and initially I thought my job would be one thing, and now my job is going to be another thing, are your officers who participate in this agreement going to have to sign a new contract? Are you concerned that if you make an arrest that turns out to be somehow illegal, that there would be liability on your department or on the university?
So, in law enforcement, priorities shift throughout eras, decades, years. So the nature of the job is always evolving and will continue to evolve. And as long as our officers act in good faith and procedurally just, I'm not concerned with liability. We can hold our officers accountable to act professionally, as they always have been, and they've always done with our community. And you mentioned Doc and Green, that's when we first started working together, where if you remember, we had this great concern that our students were going to get stopped for a traffic ticket, and it was going to affect their immigration status, because we were going to start checking random people for immigration, and it didn't happen. It was a concern of the community, and I get where it comes from, but it just didn't happen. I don't see it as being any different. We're not going to just stop random people and check their immigration status. We have to have probable cause to do any of those things.
Okay, and in the 40-hour webinar, I know you haven't participated yet, but are you, as the officers and all the other officers across the state who are participating, going to be learning about probable cause and racial profiling? Because I know that's a big concern, right? Is that going to be part of the training?
I don't know what any of that training entails, but those things you're talking about, we already learned about that.
You're well versed.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Can you talk?
Yeah, I'm just curious then, because I know that you said you can't define what probable cause is, right? That's a case-by-case thing. Okay.
To a specific scenario. There's a legal standard for what probable cause is.
Right. So what would the probable cause in a situation where you might, what would give you probable cause to say, oh, I think that student might be undocumented? That, to me, I don't see how that would tie to anything besides their appearance. Where does it come from?
It's not appearance at all. It can't be. That would be profiling.
So what would
That
it
is
be?
not probable cause. We'd have to have facts that lead us to believe that this person is here to be.
But that isn't it. The probable cause relates to the underlying crime.
The probable cause doesn't relate to the immigration status. The probable cause relates to a crime. And the problem is that if you get on the radar for, let's say, like the incident you described, then that's where.
No, but I get this question. He's asking to conduct immigration-related enforcement.
Yeah.
What would lead us to believe that someone is here illegally, where then we would conduct that investigation?
But you don't even have to, because the thing is that the moment that you arrest anyone.
I don't think he's talking about arrest yet, right?
No, yeah, because you mentioned that you would be doing, for lack of a better word, proactive enforcement, right? No, it's okay, I got it. We can share. Yeah, because I guess I'm just trying to understand, right? If you're not only going to be doing it whenever there's an administrative warrant issued to the police department by ICE, you would be doing it also proactively, which you use the phrase probable cause. So I just want to understand from a student perspective, well, what would give a police officer that we wouldn't know who is doing the immigration enforcement, right? What would give that officer probable cause to then say, hey, can I see your papers?
I really want to ask this question. Should students who are concerned carry documentation of their status with them on campus? I wrote it down somewhere and I worded it some type of way, but should I carry my proof of residency with me at all times?
that somebody committed a crime. So what those facts and circumstances are, that really is a case by case. It would be unfair for me to give you this general scenario because you're gonna walk away thinking this is the way it occurred, and that's just not fair. It's a hard question to answer in such a broad term, but again, the law is clear. You have to have facts and circumstances to really believe that a crime occurred and that this person committed that crime.
No, I understand that, and you know, I think that's what I'm trying to emphasize is that there's no clarity around that, and the truth is that every time we see these 287G agreements, we see increases in racial profiling, we see situations where U.S. citizens get unlawfully detained, and how are we as students not supposed to feel like that's what's being brought to?
So that's fair. I get your point. I get where you're coming from, and that's fair. All I can do is assure you that we will not racially profile here at FIP. We never have, and we never will. And judge us by our actions throughout our entire time here. We just don't do that.
Should students carry their papers or not?
Well, that was the other question. I'll go to that question.
Okay.
We got through the probable cause, but we got a question now.
Okay. Yeah, why don't you respond to whether or not students on campus who maybe they are an F1 visa holder from France, or a DACA recipient, or a TPS recipient, or whatever their status may be, should they carry their papers? If so, should it be on their phone? Should it be like a printout?
So, to help dispel reasonable suspicion or probable cause, that could help. So what I would say is, no, well, you're not required to. If you have anything that could help someone, help an officer dispel their suspicion or probable cause, by all means, if you think that works, carry it. And I'll give you an example, a real world example that I've actually gone through in my career in law enforcement. Every once in a while, someone will get a hit on the criminal history system that'll say they have a warrant for their arrest. But when we talk to that individual, they'll say, actually, that warrant was issued by mistake. There's someone else in the past that has used my name and date of birth, and here's my letter from the judge saying that that's the case. That's a valid, that helps us a lot. That person doesn't get taken in there because they have to verify it, but that absolutely will help. So I'm not gonna go as far as to say, carry your visa, carry your passport, carry your birth certificate. But if by all means you think that will help you dispel any suspicion that should arise, I'm not gonna tell you not to do that. It's not a bad idea, but I can't say that you're required to do it
Would you
or that's even
recommend it?
necessary.
Would you recommend
I would tell you it's not necessary.
Okay.
Now, you may say it's a good idea, but from the perspective of a police officer, I'm not gonna be checking your stuff, so you need to be careful.
If your U.S. citizens required that you carry your documentation items, it's a good idea to follow well off your own safety and security and to not put yourself at risk. But it is concerning that we're in a place where we're worried. That it is, so federal law does require, if you are a non-U.S. citizen, that you carry proof of your residency or other status. But what is extremely concerning is that we are sitting here parsing when and where people will be asking, or if people will be asking to check our papers. We've been through this before in Arizona. It didn't end well there, and it won't end well here if we continue down this road.
As Alana said, it didn't end up well in Arizona because, so 287Gs are not happening in a vacuum. This is not new. It's new for universities to take that move of enforcing immigration and terrorizing people on immigration, but 287Gs were created in 1996. That is 3 decades of baggage. There is a reason why most states have at least an agreement that was terminated or expired and never renewed. And I'm talking about the South. I'm not talking about California. California actually had a bunch and they got rid of all of them. But I'm talking about Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Arkansas, Alabama. They all have terminated 287G agreements. You can go to ilrc.org to see a map, and you're going to be impressed with the colors. The only state that is being consumed and engulfed by this crisis is Florida. And that's why it's so troublesome. If it was something good, guess what? The champion Reds and the champion Blues would be getting it. They don't get it because it's not good. In 30 years, the task force model, and I mentioned 2012, they were not being used because they were bad. So I do have a serious problem when we cannot turn back the clock. When 287Gs were invented and all the baggage that it carries, we cannot go back. We cannot turn back and make sure that people who were harmed by the implementation of this before are safe from it. But the fact that we are going a step forward into bringing something that we know is bad and bringing it to campus, and that the community is very clear that this is not good. And I also have a problem when the narrative is, we will enforce the law because a crime is a crime, but there is my morals. How can I be good? I'll not racial profile. Either is law, and law is very clear, moral, very clear, but you can't, we get into a very difficult position, Chief, because I commend you for your commitment to not racial profiling, to say that within your team, there won't be racial profiling. But the university is just going through a president transition. People are not lasting forever in their seats, and what lasts forever are guardrails. From the moment that you remove a stop sign from a crossroad, nothing tells you that people are not gonna run over each other. So the issue that I have is that, yes, I understand that the university police wants to do the right thing and is committed to not racial profiling, but when you have an agreement that has such baggage of opening opportunities for racial profiling to happen, for mistrust, and really putting people into a harmful pipeline that for many people does not have a way back. When you talk about people leaving the country, we're talking about people who are in. And it's not something that we are imagining, it's all over the internet. We're seeing videos of our very own community. We're seeing mothers that are being ripped apart from their children. College students should not be thinking about this. Our families, when they come to campus, they should not be thinking about this because this is optional. It's optional for the police to do it, and that's why they should not do it. And I'm going to close with one thing because I know that I'm going over time. It's optional to the point that you sign the agreement. I do have a couple questions that I don't think I have the answer, and I don't know if lawyers do either. Is that from the moment that you don't have an agreement, the police is not enforcing immigration. From the moment they do they really have the option to back down? When the state is putting so many sanctions and trying to create sanctuary law, the federal government is putting sanctions on harboring and so on and so forth, will we really be in a point that the chief is going to have the opportunity to decide whether or not to enforce immigration when they commit with ICE that they will do so? So I have a lot of questions.
So my last question is short, but I'm gonna add on a question to respond to the first question, which is.
Let me do one at a time, just don't forget your question. So, I think your concept, I get where you're coming from, and I understand your perspective. But the fact is, immigration enforcement is a national and state law enforcement priority now. Whether FIU signs on to 87G or not, that could absolutely come onto our campus. The reason I signed that 287G is I want to be the one where should something occur on our campus related to immigration, I want to be the department to do that because I know how our officers work, I know their professionalism, and I can assure that there won't be racial profiling. And the concept of what if, what happens when the next person's in power, I'm sorry if I'm paraphrasing, when he said that even if I'm gone in 3 years when I finally retire, our practices, our policies, the fact that we're accredited by the state of Florida, has some safeguards in place to ensure that that won't happen even if I'm not here.
So my last question is there any level of exchange? Things are changing very quickly in terms of federal immigration policy. Is there a circumstance in which you would consider withdrawing your application to enter into this agreement?
I'm not gonna go down the hypotheticals and what it is, because we just don't know.
There's not like a level where you in your head are like, if this starts happening and the immigration law changes as such
Okay,
that my
that's
officers are doing something, that's it for me. I'm gonna withdraw my university, my police force out of this agreement that I entered voluntarily into.
that's, okay, I get your question, huh? And I would respond by saying the same way that we are or aren't enforcing the state of Florida statutes, which were interpreted by the courts. There's an injunction holding us from enforcing those laws. We would continue to abide by the court rulings that govern. So laws are written, by legislature. The courts interpret those laws and we abide by the rulings from those interpretations.
Okay, so you'll abide by the court interpretation of the law.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So if the Supreme Court were to say 287G, we gotta do away with it, every agency in the country would have to abide by that.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, questions for the audience. Wow, we don't have any. Why are you guys not asking any questions? Okay, yellow bandana. They're bringing you a microphone. Okay, please, you guys, keep the questions brief. If you have a personal anecdote, keep it brief.
Thank you so much. My name is Joshua Espinosa. I am the president of College Libertarians here on campus. So if I understand your arguments correctly, Chief Casas, it's essentially that if immigration enforcement is going to come to FIU regardless, then it's better to be done by FIU PD than by federal forces. So my question to you is, practically speaking, besides racial profiling, practically speaking, what would be the difference between how FIU PD handles these situations and how ICE might handle it?
So, practically speaking, we would handle them the way you're used to us handling every situation that occurs on campus, with professionalism, with empathy. I can't speak to how ICE would or wouldn't. I can only assure you how we will.
Okay. Orange shirt. And while the microphone goes, I'm going to read one of the index charts. What assurances can you provide that our students will be protected and encouraged to speak out against unlawful arrests?
Our university, fair question, the same assurance that you have for any police activity that we engage in at FIU. There's a variety of means for you to make a complaint, to redress an injustice. The easiest one that I could recommend you to is if you go to report.fiu.edu, there's a way to even do it online where it's a single landing page where you can report anything related to FIU, whether it's a student of concern, an unsafe situation, a student conduct issue, or a police issue. When that page was first launched, I thought it was so effective that I had us add our ability for you to make an internal affairs complaint on that page. I think it's that good. We get those complaints and we investigate them.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I have a student-run newspaper, Panther Now, and I have a question for Chief Casas. I'm just wondering how much time and resources are FIU police expected to dedicate to activities related to ICE enforcement, and how might this shift in focus impact the ability to fulfill core campus safety responsibilities like addressing sexual assault, mental health crisis, theft, student support, etc.?
So I'll answer the second half first. It won't impact our ability to address anything. And as far as the first half, there is no hard number, hard percentage on what we are going to be asked to submit. We submit what we can, so we have a choice of how much resources we can dedicate. Couldn't tell you how much I'm going to do yet. We got to see when we go through that training and what it is that's going to be asked of us, how much we want to do it. But it could be one officer, it could be 6. I just can't give you a number. Other than to assure you, it will not impact how we police our campus and will not impact the safety.
So just as a follow-up question, are you guys gonna have designated police officers who are just doing ICE, or are they gonna be acting as both throughout the day?
My intent is to have officers cross-trained to do that. It will be their additional duties plus a specialization.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Tomas. I am a FIU student and the co-chair of Young Democratic Socialists at FIU. Chief Casas, you were quoted saying that collaborations with ICE would ensure that students would be dealt with the most Panther way we can think of. Instead of trying to change the aesthetics of your deportations and grossly framing them in a Panther way that cares about the community, why don't you commit in preventing immigrant students from being uprooted from their homes? You would probably say that you're only complying with federal and state rules, but there is precedent for sanctuary campuses and sanctuary cities across the country. YDSA at FIU is running a campaign to demand FIU becomes a sanctuary campus. Will you commit to stopping your contract with ICE and accepting the demand that FIU shall become a sanctuary campus?
We signed a 287G agreement. I've already indicated why, and I'm not. My intent is good on that. I'm not gonna.
Okay, I'm gonna read one of these index cards. How do we keep undocumented students safe with the dangerous narrative that undocumented people are criminals? How do we keep undocumented students safe with the dangerous narrative that undocumented people are criminals?
I think that's a narrative that's beyond the scope of the police department. But if you break the law, law enforcement has to respond. We have a duty to do that.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
She's spoken to
Okay, while you do that,
Yes, I don't need the mic. Hi, my name is Carla. I work with survivors of labor trafficking every day. Right now, they're afraid to report any crime, wage theft, rape, name it. What is the assurance that someone with a deportation order can go on train, make a report and not end it turning to us? Because that I see it every day, and I'm sure in campus it's gonna happen. A rape victim that have a deportation order, they're not gonna go to your office or call because they know they're gonna be turned to us.
So again, that's the first question. My understanding is the way the law is now, if you're the victim of a crime, you report that crime, so for example, when I worked domestic violence, if you were a victim of domestic violence or human trafficking, and you report that, you're not subject to those issues. You have almost amnesty.
Everything changed, now everything is different, but I like before,
I haven't
we
seen
have that safeguard, now we don't have it.
So if that's the case, I haven't seen that change.
No, but that's the problem. That's the problem, and I think you're right, that victims are afraid and are empowering abusers because we are creating an environment of fear.
The point I make is I don't think the law has changed or the
That's
protection for
that,
victims.
it's the mindset.
I get it, you're absolutely
I
right.
understand, but the fear is, see, there's FIU police, but there's what's happening in the so-called free state of Florida. And the mindset where walking or driving out of color, we'll say, makes you vulnerable in different parts of the state. So think of, and I've made the comment before, we are in an environment of increasing fear, and victims, especially the victims of trafficking, are in danger. And we've seen how there are victims even here on campus, and they would be afraid to report. And that's the problem.
Alright, I have an index card question. You guys don't need to keep your hands up, I'll see them. If a student informs on another undocumented student, would that constitute probable cause? Imagining a situation in which there is a student who's working on a class project and an undocumented student discloses that they are undocumented. And then they go tell on their fellow student to the FIU Police Department, would that be probable cause for you to act?
So that could start us on a journey toward probable cause, but, you gotta let me finish my answer, please. But without learning the details of how those federal statutes will apply, I can't tell you that that's how we would get there.
And,
I think I would need more than that.
okay, so it would be a start on the journey towards probable cause.
It could.
So you could start an investigation into that.
It could, but again, I would have to go through the training and have our executives to understand where that goes. Right now, it wouldn't be.
Okay, thank you. And thank you so much for being here, honestly. It's, I think, really
Oh, it's a
important.
blast. It's cool.
Is undocumented status a criminal act or a misdemeanor?
Yes, it's also question.
They have, I do that all the time. The problem is that its entry into the United States without inspection is considered a federal crime. And the thing is that there's the restraining order from the federal judge on the issues related to what Florida has done with its laws. But the problem is that there's been the criminalization of immigration. And the thing is that this is where people need to be careful. And this is why I say ask for counsel, because of the criminalization at the federal level and at the level of the state of Florida.
Yeah, I just got a follow up on that last bit, police chief, because with all due respect, like, you absolutely need to clarify if there's gonna be a culture of chivatos and snitches at this university, where people are gonna resolve their interpersonal problems or whatever it is by snitching on the documented status of students. Like, I understand that you haven't gone through the training yet, but that needs to be established and made clear to the students, to the faculty, to the police officers that are going to be enforcing this. Are we going to create a culture of snitching in this university where people are going to be pointing fingers at each other based on their documentation status? I'm sorry.
No, it's actually not fair. It's not fair, because I was clear, it could start us for a probable cause. We still have to look into it, but it's no different than if I got a call and say, hey, so-and-so is selling marijuana, so-and-so is selling cocaine, so-and-so committed a rape, so-and-so has a gun in the trunk. You still need that plus more to conduct an investigation. No, we're not gonna have a culture of snitches, and we won't act on something like that.
Okay. Yes, sir.
So Chief Hassett, to kind of clarify, you said that you have no discretion if something's a crime and you would have to act. But there are inherent discretion in a police and things that are criminal. I'll give an example. In Florida and a number of other states, it is currently a misdemeanor to commit adultery. What's it called? I do not know if you act on complaints of people committing adultery. I'm sure there are probably adultery taking place, but generally most states and law enforcement don't arrest people for adultery. So is there not some discretion to, just because it's a crime, doesn't mean that you have to arrest somebody?
So when we're discussing that, we were talking in the broad aspect of warrants and that type of stuff. And there's some crimes that we don't have discretion on, some of the more serious crimes. We absolutely always have discretion, particularly at the beginning of an investigation, to make that determination. An example I can give you is marijuana. I can't tell you how many marijuana arrests we make. Here at FIU, luckily, we can go through the student conduct route, or we can choose to say, and this was before the law changed, I'm talking about, so we do have discretion, and we do have alternatives, but there's some things that we don't. I mean, some law we just can't overlook.
And in the instances where you and your police force does have discretion, how will you make that determination, and how will you make that determination?
So, no different than we would on any other illegal act. If we are presented a set of facts and circumstances, and as we start to look into it, we get a different set of facts and circumstances that dispel that probable cause or dispel every suspicion, we could absolutely not continue to
And
move forward.
what about a fact such as a student that came to this country at a very young age, before they were, even conscious that they came to this country, and they are illegally in this country undocumented. What kind of discretion would you use in that case?
If that individual had an order of detention, a judicial warrant, we would have to enact that question.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Do I would I need my phone? I guess I'm right here.
Hi, I'm here on behalf of Camden County Youth Division. I have a question in reference to Section 10, which details the installation of IT infrastructure, and Section 12, which specifies reporting back, quote, specific statistical information and tracking data. If a change were to happen to a student's temporary status because of something like an executive order, would the student be confronted by campus police in the way of probable cause combined with the use of this technology? And in addition, is there a fear that there would be state or federal reprimand for not detaining certain students if they were to be essentially kind of like the tracking stuff that we have for COVID? For example, we would have questionnaires that if you didn't fill it out upon entering campus based on your license plate, it would send you an email. If there were a change to the legal infrastructure, for whatever reason, by way of executive order, would you not going to a student who has this kind of changing status, would that cause reprimand for your department? And how would you guys handle the use of this technology, which is detailed in the reprimand?
So what technology are you referring to? Because I'm not aware of any technology that they're installing. And you mean access to the databases?
Yeah, I think these are correct.
Is that what you mean?
Sure, it's partly access to the databases, but it says in Section 10 that there's an installation of IT technology. It doesn't specify what
Okay.
the technology is.
So my understanding of how that works is very similar to what we have, for example, to get access to Florida criminal records. You're required to install certain firewalls to protect from hacking, and so that's my understanding of how that works. So we would have to agree to let them install the firewall like we do right now with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And what was the rest of the question?
Is
Or was it
there
more of a comment?
fear of reprimand for, you had said that there's.
Are you
certain
concerned
personal
about-
discretion. Sorry, you said that there's this sort of personal discretion in terms of certain rules that you guys have. You cited marijuana as one of those where you can go the student conduct route. Is there a fear of reprimand from the state or from the federal government in terms of not exercising full legal, let's say, detainment of certain people?
If we start to conduct if our officers are deputized, and the way I read the agreement, if it plays out the way we think it's going to play out, if our officers are deputized and we start an investigation into a illegal immigration complaint or someone who's here illegally, and we get a set of facts that thwart that is to be that that's not the case, we're fine. There's nothing to be concerned about on our officers' part.
I have a question here, kind of related on a note card. Was your thinking that if you did not agree to sign with ICE, that FIU might somehow be targeted by federal authorities, and I would add, or by people in the state government?
I had no reason to think that FIU was going to be targeted by anybody. But what I did want to do is be in a position to have as much influence. So should this come down to us, or when this comes down to us, that I can be the one interacting with our FIU community.
And did you feel pressured by Governor Ron DeSantis' encouragement of law enforcement agencies to sign on to this agreement?
No.
Okay. Yes, and then
Just a comment, because Chief mentioned earlier that immigration enforcement is both a national and a state priority, which feels to me that it's a little bit of pressures that we are talking about, and maybe a little bit untold, knowing that immigration enforcement is actually a political priority. Because national priority is cost of living. Floridian's priority is safety from hurricane, it's capacity to recovery, it's rental control, these are priorities. Like immigration enforcement in a campus that prides itself from being one of the most diverse and absolutely the most Latino in the state, immigration priority is not really, right? Like it feels to me that it is a political priority more so than a state or a national.
Well, get that's how you feel, but you misquoted me a little bit. I was saying that it was a national law enforcement and a state law enforcement priority. And if all these agencies in Florida are signing on these agreements, I can't be one of the ones who have to do it. I have to read the room. No, I can't abdicate that enforcement authority to another agency. I want to be the one doing it in our community.
Okay, everybody please, this is a respectful environment. We are very lucky,
It's not bad.
but we are really lucky to have the chief here being so open with us. The person with the mask.
Yeah, so when I was a student here at FIU, I was actually in high school, I was doing dual enrollment. So my question is, how is FIU communicating that they have signed on the 287G agreements and the dangers that it poses to the students and their families when it comes to dual enrollment? How are you communicating this to the high schools? Because they will be with their parents and they will be in danger. How are you communicating this?
We haven't sent any messages to the high schools, but their administration is aware that we have the agreement.
When will
So
you
we
do
didn't
it?
communicate it to the student, but we did communicate it to the administration.
To what, to Miami-Dade County Public Schools?
No, the administrators here on campus.
When will you send something out to Miami-Dade Public Schools, to the charter schools that you work with, to the high schools, so that their students know?
I get your position, but there is no danger from FIU police here on our campus. And that is it's a public record, and she's gonna be on top of it, so she'll tell you as soon as it happens.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if there was a timeline for you sending that out to the schools, for example, saying, hey, just so that you know, this is what we've signed on to, this is the MOU, this is what it states, this is how it will affect or not affect your students.
You know, we have our mechanisms in place to communicate to our faculty staff and through student government to our students, and there's liaisons there's that high school that's on our campus. It's AAA, Terry Graham Center, right? That's what you're talking about?
There's high schools also that, for example, when I was a student at Matter Academy, so not necessarily here on campus, but it's high schools that FIU partners with for dual enrollment.
We won't be going into K-12. That's no, just the one that's on our campus. We're communicating with that administration to let them know that we are in these agreements.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay. I have a note card. How many police officers will be trained for immigration enforcement, and how are you going to decide this? And I also would like to know how is this going to be paid for?
So there's no mechanism in place to reimburse us for any costs other than costs incurred for training and so forth. And I don't know yet how many officers I'm going to assign.
I can still go. I'll go. So, okay. I don't know if folks know, but the U.S. Department of Defense administers a program called the 1033 program, which transfers excess military equipment to U.S. police forces, federal, state, and local. This program has so far sent $6 billion in military gear and weaponry to police departments. In fact, FIU PD has received over $1.5 million in weaponry, including at least 50 rifles and 2 mine-resistant vehicles, those big-ass trucks you see that are supposed to withhold explosions. All this tells us that FIU PD, like other police departments, are at war with us. Police do not serve or protect us, they terrorize and murder Black and brown and racialized communities. The militarized police response enabled by the 1033 program is going to be further enabled by 287Gs, which, let's be clear, is ethnic cleansing by another name. So rather than asking a question, because I know we're going to ask a bunch of questions that's not going to get us anywhere, I'd like to just tell everyone here who's actually here in good conscience to, actually get organized. Rather than speaking to our oppressors, speak to the people in your community, see what they need. And at the end of the day, we can ask questions about bureaucracy, whatever. The only thing that's going to help us and save us is if we actually fight back. Use your resources, use your body, use everything you have to get over, right? And let's be clear. Let's protect the students and also protect faculty and staff. The people who come every day here, this is a place of work, they're also targets of the 287G. So please, use your anger, use it here, get organized, talk to folks at Community Justice Project, talk to IDSA, come to the Miramar Circle of Protection, talk to the Students for Justice in Palestine, find a community, find an organization, community, and actually fight back. Do not let people get taken.
a two-time alumni. I love my school so much, I stayed for a second degree and signed on to be a professor. And on top of that, I have the pleasure of teaching first-year global students. So I have the eye that is international from FIU in my classroom every day. On the first day of classes, before my students could even exchange and do our little icebreakers that I try to keep fun, right? Before they could even exchange names with their colleagues, I had a student who had to step out. He later came to me and apologized profusely and told me, I'm sorry, I had to step out because I'm getting emails from my immigration lawyer. I think there's been a serious I don't even know what to call it. I think there's been a lack of consideration for the fact that this is going to impact academics too. This was announced during finals of spring. I had students who didn't want to come to class. This is happening now, during the summer, again. And I have students who are telling me, like that student, I'm scared to leave my apartment, I'm scared to go to the doctor, I'm scared to go to Publix, I'm scared to even go to class, but then if I don't go to class, they use that against me. And I know you're going to say that they don't have access to the records, I get that, I've been briefed on that as well. But what does it say about the culture that we're setting, about the impact it's going to have academically? And also, I feel the need to remind that my students pay like 4 times the tuition that the rest of us do. So when we hire a new coach for the stadium, when we hopefully build another parking garage, when we put up all these 20,000 palm trees that no one asked for, my students are paying for that too. Why does their money not count? Why is their academic integrity and their academic performance not being looked at as a factor of what you're trying to do and how it's going to be impacted?
I entered into the agreement with the intent to take care of our community as much as I could. I hear you, I understand the way you feel, understand the way your students feel, but it is with their interests and with the interest of the faculty and the staff here at FIU that I entered into that agreement.
Okay, and question here. Will your officers who sign on to the 287G have to meet a quota of arrests? I know that ICE field officers do have some quotas per day. Do you know if your officers will also have quotas?
No. They won't have quotas.
I think there's going to be more questions probably for this side of the panel. Let me just like relax a bit and all take a second. So I'm faculty here as well, and obviously I'm just as alarmed as everyone here in the audience has been from all of this unexpected news. So let me ask a more pragmatic question. I know some of us is, don't interfere when you see something happening, should something happen, inform your students of their rights. But there's 2 things I really want to know. One, what can I be doing for my students to help them feel more comfortable? Like, what is my role in this now? And I need to know if our offices, our department rooms, and our classrooms are private spaces.
I'm not completely sure, but this is the thing. You've seen the case of the judge who's been charged with helping a person to avoid immigration enforcement. We are all technically under state definition, state officials. Everyone from the maintenance people on up are considered state employees. FIU is a state sub-agency, basically, under the Board of Governors. And the question is, we have a major problem. And we've seen that Dreamers have been pulling out because of the out-of-state tuition waiver problem. And the question is, I think we will be a poorer school because of the environment that has been created. We have the situation with the State Department canceling visas. We have the situation with the out-of-state waivers. And we have the situation with the problem with 287G. understanding the effort that is mentioned here. My concern is that we, as faculty, are in a difficult situation because, and I can tell you this as someone who represents undocumented people, I find myself being very much of a reality check for many people. I find myself switching from a mindset of what possibilities were in an environment where people, we thought we were moving forward. And I can tell you that now I find myself advising clients, and sometimes students are clients. I tell them, this is the reality of what we're facing, and we have to just be careful, understanding that I don't know how to protect people from not even here. I'm talking about generally outside of FIU.
I do want to ask the chief to clarify. A classroom. We know that private spaces, we talked about this earlier, homes, you need a warrant to enter. Is a classroom a private space?
No. Your dorm room is, but not a classroom.
Okay.
In the office, every office might be a little bit different. Some might be, some might not be. They have to depend. So if you're in an office with a bunch of cubicles, no. If you have a private office, it might be, depending on how that access is controlled and limited. But typically, workspaces are not considered private spaces.
And a residence hall?
So typically, they're not considered private spaces. They're not. But a residence hall. So, and I'll give you a really detailed example. You have a dorm room with 4 private bedrooms and then 1 common area. The common area is not a private space, but the individual bedrooms are. I can't go in there without one.
Okay, I'm hearing that classrooms are public spaces, some offices may be private spaces if they're very close off.
I would say most are not. Most are public.
Most offices are public, dorm rooms are private, and residence halls as a whole are public.
And be clear, it's the dorm bedrooms, not the common area and the dorm, like the kitchen and the dining area, the specific bedroom.
And again, if it's a private space, you would need a warrant to enter. If it's not, you would not need a warrant.
So the only way I wouldn't need a warrant is say I got a call, like a check on the welfare, and you're not responding to the door next, and I have exigent circumstances to believe that you could be in harm's way. I can't enter a check on the welfare.
Okay, thanks, Frenchie. And it's 8:45.
I love the way she's like picking you out with like.
It's 8:45, and I want to respect for everybody's time, so only a few more questions, and then I'll ask you if people have more questions how to reach you. Thanks, Frenchie. Or like that.
Hello, my name is Andrew. This question is for Senor Casas. So my question is, what is the difference between the 287 template that has been provided by ICE and the one that you're proposing to ICE, or is the independence, autonomy, agency, and I guess discretion that you mentioned, only that which is specifically delineated and assigned by the federal government?
So the 287 agreement, the template isn't changed. It's the same thing you get online is the same one that we sign. And the discretion, there's always discretion involved in law enforcement in the interpretation of whether a crime occurred or not. Facts lead us to either increase or dispel that suspicion.
Okay. The guy with the green, we believe in change. Sorry.
Oh, wow, that's very interesting. For the teachers or the students, did you before this, like, did you guys know anything about this agreement? Right. Oh, wow. Well, thank you.
Okay.
Hi, so this question is for Chief Alexander Casas. My name is Lael, and I'm an anti-Zionist Jewish student and the co-chair of the Young Democratic Socialists of America at FIU. Over the last few months, we have seen students arrested by ICE and held in detention facilities as a result of organizing work on campus. Mahmoud Khalil, for example, was detained by ICE after his organizing work at Columbia University to end the genocide in Palestine? Will you commit to protecting the freedoms of speech and the political rights of students like Khalil on this campus?
As we have, since I've been here at least, FIUPD can commit to protecting the rights of the students to engage in expressive activities. But please, remember when you do so, abide by the university policies and by state laws. I gave mine.
While you have the microphone, I'm gonna read one quickly from an index card. As an FIU professor, you may have undocumented students taking your courses. How would you feel if your department detained one of them?
Talk about me as a professor?
Yeah.
If FIUPD detained one of my students, the same way I feel if any of our students got detained. Well, I have a great degree of empathy and I understand the hardship, but as long as they were procedurally just and followed the law, there's really not much we can do.
Go ahead.
Thank you for being here. I have a question. I want to make sure I get the facts right. So correct me if I'm wrong. So you want to do the best for the community. You also stated that you don't think there's any reason for, if you didn't sign an agreement, then ICE would call on campus. You didn't think there was a reason that they would be targeted. And you also said that you want to follow the Constitution, you want to enforce crimes, or enforce the law that surrounds crimes. So then my question is, the agreement doesn't seem to be doing that. It's like, why wouldn't it be a better option to not sign an agreement, to enforce ICE, because that's preventing crimes? Maybe before today you didn't know that, but now you have. If ICE is committing crimes, you want to enforce crimes, you care about the community, and ICE doesn't, then why don't you just separate yourself from ICE, enforce the crimes that ICE is committing, and not sign an agreement? Why does it make sense to be the touch point while companioning with or teaming up with ICE? If you want to be a touch point, to just enforce the crimes that ICE commit. Like what? It's just, I believe that you really want the best for me, but it seems that the 287G agreement, nobody wants this. So if you really want the best for me, like, and if ICE is not doing what you want, then why are you teaming with us?
I think I've mentioned that a few times what my intent is and why I signed it. I believe it is in the best interest of our FIU community that your FIU police department be the ones to conduct any enforcement activity related to immigration on our campus. I don't want to advocate the possibility of doing that to any other agency. And that's why I took that position and why I signed the agreement with the intention of looking out for our FIU community. It's conducting our policing in a way that you're used to us having interact with you regardless of the issue, whether you agree with the issue or not. You mentioned protecting our students' rights to free speech and how they're always changing the rules. But it's the interactions that I think, yeah, we have to abide by the rules and those laws, but the way we interact with you when that occurs, it's very different than I think people would interact with you if you were to do that outside of it.
Maybe blue.
Oh, yes, thank you. My question is to the chief. Thank you, chief, for coming here. Appreciate your courage. My question is, based off what you say that you, and if I'm paraphrasing, if I get it wrong, let me know. You want to have a say in what ICE does on campus. Is that true?
If there's any immigration enforcement activity to be conducted on campus, I want to be in a position to have a say in that.
So why, I guess, would it be a better, wiser strategy to not enter into this agreement, but create a separate agreement with the input of students, legal experts, and FIU leadership that would establish those boundaries from ICE from the very get-go? I guess my question is, why do you feel the need to enter into this agreement when it's so problematic in order for you to have that say? Because this is your jurisdiction.
That's a fair question. That's a fair question. Your point is well taken. There is no other option. The only agreement that they enter into is that template. What change, what I do have some control over is how that's executed. is how we interact with our community.
Okay, light blue.
Very briefly. Yeah, thank you. So, some of you know me, I was the mayor of South Miami for a decade, professor here for 31 years. I don't think it's on, but I'll just have to speak up. Professors can usually be heard. One of my constituents was arrested by a South Miami, not police officer, or detective, sergeant, probably the most competent, the best person on our force, one of my very favorites. And she felt terrible having done it. He was handed over to ICE. They took him as far away from South Miami as they could just to make his life as difficult as they could. He ultimately did get a hearing, spent $35,000, got free, he had a green card, and the whole set of charges were bogus. But the trauma he experienced, and I've talked about this extensively, he felt betrayed by the South Miami Police Department, who he felt should have protected him. And he was traumatized by how he was treated with ICE nonetheless. So if ICE had come to his house and picked him up in his PJs when he went out to get his newspaper in the morning, that would have been pretty unpleasant. But as it was, one of his very favorite members of the South Miami PD was the one who had to do the job. And he felt betrayed by them. So I think, you and I know and appreciate one another, and I respect and appreciate your motives, but I don't really know that in the end it matters in a good way whether your officers are doing the arresting or whether the ICE officers are doing the arresting. It's still going to be a traumatic experience in the whole, but now our student feels betrayed by somebody that he trusted previously. And so I think the harms are committed, and the harms to your department are greater this way than they would be otherwise. And I know you disagree with me about this, and I'm not going to change your mind, but I just wanted to speak my piece.
I understand that, but I think that's my burden to bear, is I want to be the one interacting with our community. And yes, that's a burden that we bear in law enforcement.
Multicolored.
Following up on that question then, because you said about protecting the Panther community and doing it as much in the Panther community as you can, could you at least take the advice when you go to detain people and tell the people that you are detaining or arresting that don't sign any paperwork? Make sure you talk to an immigration lawyer and that's part of the process, so at least you're giving them options that they might not otherwise know.
So you understand it's a hard question for me to answer. But what I can tell you is everything that I'm hearing, I'm taking into consideration. I disrespect my position as a law enforcement officer where I can't give a more detailed answer than that. But I am listening to and one of the reasons I do these town halls and I meet as often as possible is that it does give me perspective and it does ground me a little bit. It does help me understand why it's important that we get this right, that we do this the best way we can do it. It's something that I feel we need to do anyway, but the way we do it has so much to do with what I'm hearing from all of you.
Thank you. This is another question from the chief. Sort of backtracking to the initial conversation about having a culture of snitching and other students talking about the documented status of other students. I have a question for you to lead up to this. Are you familiar with the citizen academies we have down there?
The Citizen Police Academies? Yes.
And are you aware that ICE does lead some of those?
I think they have, can't say with certain, but I understand they do have their own Citizen Police Academies.
And for context for the audience, citizen academies are, how do you say, voluntary sort of enforcement organizations where citizens are picked up by the police, they volunteer by the police to be trained in investigations, how to apply lethal, non-lethal force. I want to read this verbatim just so I get the facts correctly. This is an article from the document. But the program known as Citizen Academies includes role-play scenarios of civilians to conduct fictional raids on immigrants and its active in New York and more than a dozen cities across the country. The program is run by Homeland Security Investigations, the branch of ICE in charge of intelligence, international affairs, and surveillance. Knowing that we have these citizen academies so close in proximity to our campus as we do in Miami proper, Miami Gardens, other places throughout Florida, can you ensure that the students on campus will not have other civilians, other citizens playing essentially Gestapo, pretending to be ordinary civilians who are not going to snitch and turn in other undocumented citizens or undocumented immigrants and the like?
So the Citizens Police Academies don't empower the citizens in any way to conduct any enforcement activity. That's not what comes out of it. It's designed as a community policing tool to help those citizens that want to learn more about law enforcement understand the job a little better. It gives them no authority and no power whatsoever when they come out of it.
I have, if it's okay, there's a follow-up question to that. In that instance, if that's the case, why is it that there are official federal documents and PowerPoint slides that are shown in Citizen Academies detailing exactly how to go about using lethal force? I can quote verbatim, I have a slide right here, specifically about how to provide rhetorical cover if if somebody, how do you say it? I'm sorry, I need to find this exactly.
You're talking about the ICE?
I'm talking about ICE. Essentially, instructing civilians who are part of these institutions to drop guns.
So, don't know all the details of the ICE Men's Academy, but if they're anything like the one that occurred at Miami-Dade Police when I ran one, when I was there in Community Affairs Bureau, we do not do that. We do not teach people how to get cover. You do discuss the laws, you do discuss court rulings and interpretations, you give them an overview of stuff, but it's not an instruction on how to get away with stuff.
This is
We
gonna
do
be
it once.
like the last question.
Hi, Professor. So you mentioned, in the Student 7G task force model, participating officers have access to, he mentioned earlier, ISAT-T, which essentially means ISAT, which is the Intensive Supervision and Hearings Program. That's available to over 182,000 people since November. But they also would be allowed to bring aliens arrested pursuant to immigration laws to the nearest ICE partner facilities. Will FIU PD personally deliver FIU students suspected of non-legal status to ICE facilities, including those run by ICE or private corporations with a history of human rights and wellness violations, like the Crone Detention Center in Miami, where 3 people have died since November, or Geo Group's Broward Transitional Center, where a teen died just last month? Because it is in your jurisdiction, and the task force does allow for it.
So if the question relates to where we would take those that we conduct the enforcement action, let's say they have a warrant or we got probable cause, we would take them wherever we're directed to do so. Couldn't tell you where they go now. Yes, there's Crone Detention Center, TGK, but wherever that, once we go through the training and they identify the location, that's where we would take them.
Alright, well, thank you. I think that's it for questions because we want to respect the chief's time. I'm just going to ask you, is there anything else that you would like to say, anything you want to tell the community?
So, thanks y'all for showing up on a summer semester, Wednesday night. And however you feel about this issue, I gotta tell you that I appreciate the respect you showed me. However heated up you are about the issue, however heated up you are about the questions, I just haven't felt any animosity from you, and I appreciate that. But I hope you understand that that's reciprocal. I care very deeply about our community. I've got many ties here. I really have your best interest at heart when I'm entering this agreement. I want to have as much control, input, whatever word you want to use into how this affects us, should it affect us. And there's no guarantee that it even will. But should that come here, I want to be the one in the driver's seat of that initiative as much as I can, because I know how our police department polices our community. I know what you come to expect from us. And I would have to believe you're comfortable with us, maybe up until now, to a certain point. But I hope moving forward you continue to be comfortable with us, because our standard of service has not changed, regardless of what task we're being asked to do, or what task I see coming down the horizon that could come in here, and we need to take an initiative on it.
Thank you so much. people have further questions, is there a way to get in touch with you?
You don't have to write it down, but you can get my email address. It's adcasas@fiu.edu. I've already received several emails. I respond to all of them. They may take me a minute. Sometimes when I get a lot, it takes me a minute to get to them. But I will respond to your emails. If you want to make an appointment to talk to me, my second office is Costello in the Ram Center. I'd be happy to meet you for a cup of coffee there and continue to talk and help me understand your perspective on this, because it does, your input does matter to me, and it does, and I do listen. Again, it may not change what I have to do, but it can very much influence the way I do, and that is valuable to me.
Alright, do you have anything else, any other?
So I think the proposal of Professor asked about what we can do to keep students safe, and we don't have a magic wand of knowing rights that helps, but I think what I'm so impressed with the faculty and the students who have continued to organize and not just let this be the case and move on. I think we're gonna have to do that for a while to see a difference here. If you care about this issue, June 12th, the city of Miami is considering signing on to this. There's groups like Miami Freedom Project's here, I think Engage Miami and Florida Student Power. There's lots of groups that are organizing around that. Stay involved, don't let this be normal. It's
One more quick thing, let me say, and we look it up real quick too. In my experience in law enforcement, like dealing with like suspended licenses and stuff like that, or some warrants, a lot of those sometimes are issued when you get a ticket or you get arrested and you give an address and when you move and it goes to the wrong address. Sometimes you'll get a warrant or something just because it didn't go to your house and you didn't know it. If you have some form of a visa or something, there's a form that you can go to. It's the AR-11. It's an alien change of address card. Just Google AR-11. So say you move, or say you have an F-1 visa, an H-1B visa, and you move, fill out that information. So should you get something from ICE or DHS, it goes to the right address and you get that notification.
Okay, well, thank you guys all so